Just remember, there are no ethical consumers in global capitalism.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation titled, Can You Be an Ethical Consumer in Global Capitalism? I exclusively chose this question because of this Vine that I watched in 2015 that I just played, because I didn't really know what it meant at the time, and now I feel ready to tackle it. So, this question's economics related because capitalism has allowed for the exponential growth of GDP in the US and other developed countries, as we've learned in this class. Global capitalism allows private companies to trade freely between national borders to maximize productivity. Within that trade, consumers play an important role, creating aggregate demand and dictating the value of a good or service on the market. We have to find the answer to this question because we're all participating in global capitalism with every purchase we make, and consumers are taking increasing pride in purchasing products that reflect their own ethics. We need to find out if this purchasing preference is actually reflecting better or more ethical treatment of workers and resources on the company's end, or if this is just a marketing ploy allowing for extractionary processes to continue under the radar. As I mentioned in the previous slide, capitalism in a market economy theoretically does not prevent ethical practices, but in practice, the pressure to increase productivity and lower the cost of production has created unethical solutions. As we can see on this graph, GDP has exploded from the rise in capitalism in the US, Japan, and Western Europe. But what benefits have come to the rest of the world? Despite great advances in technology to increase productivity, late capitalism has exported much of the environmental harm and poor labor practices out of the developed world, placing these burdens on lower income countries. The true costs of the products we buy are far greater than the market price due to these external effects. As of late, consumers are attempting to make more informed decisions on where their money goes to avoid contributing to these exploitative practices. The question is this even possible? Ethical consumers purchase products that emphasize ethics, environmentalism, and other social movements. They often argue that people vote with their dollars, meaning a consumption of ethical products influences the global market toward kinder business practices sharing these values. In the next slide, I'll discuss whether or not this is a legitimate strategy to oppose the unethical practices of global capitalism. In reality, ethical consumption incentivizes purchasing from companies who share your values, but it does just that. It incentivizes purchasing, perpetuating excess consumption in the same capitalist system that people adamantly oppose. As a result, consumers are attempting to solve the problem of capitalism by continuing the problem. One of the biggest issues is that capitalism creates a fetishism of products, which separates a product entirely from the value of the labor it took to produce it. Ethical consumerism attempts to bridge this gap, but producers now know this. Producers can conceal less ethical labor practices and highlight their greatest moral achievements because there's no real pressure to be ethically producing, only to attract consumers. In summary, the visibility of a company's ethics is an important marketing strategy to attract consumers and increase revenue, but their actual practices are largely complicit with the capitalistic system in place. Consumption in the United States is intimately tied to the existing capitalist system, despite efforts to purchase responsibly. Unethical practices have been embedded within global capitalism, so there can be no purchase that doesn't directly relate to someone else's harm. The limitations of this question are great because global capitalism is a huge generalization of the economic systems in play around the world. I'm sure there's purchasing and bartering on small scales that can be morally responsible to the parties involved, which I did not include. Also, the idea of ethical consumption in general is largely Western and exclusionary to most of the world. For my answer to be incorrect, I would have to assume that the world could start valuing the labor and land of the producers fairly, which would drive the price of goods and services up significantly. Global capitalism could have ethical consumption if this were true, because production would value social, environmental, and financial ethics inherently, like the triple bottom line model of ethics that I put here: people, profit, and planet. Consumption would then support these practices and the well-being of society. I feel that my assumptions are correct because ethical consumption thus far has been consumers' best efforts to be morally responsible, but it does not actually incentivize real change within companies or global capitalism. Ethical consumerism will perpetuate capitalism and trap more people into believing that their dollar could dismantle the very system that it is funding. Thank you for your time and attention.